Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Malika Brown, and we are about to go into an important panel discussion that centers around our 2020 general election. We have aptly titled this The Power of the Polls, and just want you to understand how important it is for us to use the rights that have been fought for us to vote in this country and the issues that matter to our demographic, and mixing faith and our civic responsibilities, and being able to understand that even as faith believers, that we still have a civic duty to our brothers and sisters of the global community to make sure that we're making our voices heard and acting on the things that matter to us. So I want to thank, first of all, our IPYPU president, Evangelist Frida Morrison, and the programming department that is led by Elder Stuart Stiles III, and all of those who have worked to put this together. And let's not belabor this. We're going to go ahead and bring in our panelists and introduce them to you. Also, remember that we're broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube, so let me put that out there. So first up, we have Ms. Shekinah Douglas, and I'm going to actually allow them, when they get on, to give a brief introduction of what they do in the community and their connection to this issue. And she is someone that I know personally. I've known her since she was much younger, and watched her rise and seen the things that she has championed for. So I'm going to go ahead and let her give a really brief introduction about herself.
Well, praise the Lord, everyone. I am so excited to be here, and I'm excited about this particular topic. I am a graduate of UCLA with a BA in Political Science and African American Studies. I am also a graduate of the Howard University School of Law. I am currently licensed to practice in Maryland, and I currently practice criminal law in DC. And so my particular passion is really geared toward criminal justice reform, and all of the things that really pertain to how people are liberated spiritually and financially and emotionally and in education as well. So that is pretty much my passion for when it comes to this particular topic.
Thank you, and we appreciate having you here. And we'll bring in our second panelist. And there he is, Mr. Farrakhan Shagag, and he is going to introduce himself and let you know a little bit about himself as well.
Good evening, everyone. As our great and beautiful host has said, Farrakhan Shagag is my name, born and raised out here in St. Louis, Missouri. I wear multiple hats. And my favorite saying is, it's okay to wear multiple hats. Just make sure they match your uniform.
There you have it. Those who don't know me, they know that I am a psychologist, but I'm also a professor of psychology. One of my classes that I teach, which I'm currently teaching this semester, is Psychology of the African American. It's something that I'm actually working on a textbook for. So this is an issue that's really important to me, to make sure that we are empowered as a people, not just from a spiritual standpoint, because we know historically we focus on that, but also from a civic and educational standpoint as well. So let's get into this. We do have some prepared questions, and we will try to go with those, but depending on how it flows, I may throw some things in there that I think are important to talk about. The first question that I want to kind of throw out there is kind of the grumblings that we hear among African Americans when choosing a candidate, because we know that the candidates that we have, both are flawed. They're not necessarily who we might have picked to be considered the ideal candidate to run the country. And many are saying that they're picking between the lesser of two evils, and they don't want to do that. So they're either choosing they're not going to vote, or you have to prove to them that you're the proper candidate, or they're going to vote for a third party candidate. So let's attack this issue of the lesser of two evils and what is really playing when it comes to the issue of who we're choosing for president in the November 3rd election. And I'm going to start with ladies first. So we'll start with Shekinah.
So I really think that, people have put a lot of their emotions into this particular decision. I remember in 2016 election, people kept saying, well, I don't like Hillary Clinton. And I remember Oprah saying, well, do you like your country? And so we were in this position in 2016, whereas it was a choice between Lucifer and Satan. And so that's what people were thinking and saying, right? People were saying, I guess I'm with her. or something like that. And so I think at this juncture, we really need to get to the same level of a Mitch McConnell. Here's what I'm saying. Hear me out on this. Hate him or love him, you have to respect Mitch McConnell's gangster. He does not care whether you like him or not. He's going to get his agenda accomplished. The individual voter and the organizations in which we join, we have to have that same level of consistency. We have to have that same level of focus in that it's not so much about your morals. Because here's the other thing I'm going to say, and this is across the board for any seminar. It is asinine to expect holiness and morality out of people without the Holy Ghost. Okay, so these candidates don't have the power to overcome certain things. On top of that, Joe Biden, he has been in politics longer than most of us have been alive. He's going to have more of a political past to contend with. And so when it comes to the 1994 crime bill, when it comes to certain things, even certain off-topic, off-the-wall things that he said, he has more to contend with. So, of course, if you're looking at him as a person for his likability, you're not going to really find him endearing. But when it comes to what he can accomplish on our behalf, historically speaking, Joe Biden has been able to coalition and work across the aisle. So I'm not saying that you have to like him. I'm saying you have to marry him. What I'm saying is you have to really look at both candidates and assess what they can accomplish. Morality is not something that I am concerned with because, again, like I said, they're not saved. What I am concerned with is literacy. I am concerned with competency. I am concerned with diplomacy. I am concerned with someone who has the decorum and the ability to do the job we elected them to do. I will also say this is that I think we also can't let our standards fall so low. Yes, we want to put a particular person in office, but when that person gets in office, if it's not the current president, hold that person accountable consistently. Just because currently you think the standard has been lowered doesn't mean that this is what we should be doing or conducting ourselves by. The standard should be what the standard has always been when it comes to our elected officials, and that is, again, like I said, competency. That is being effective. That is being able to coalition and work across the aisle. Every president, every elected official should be able to do that on our behalf.
And Farrakhan, I'm gonna let you go ahead and give your input on this question as well.
Sure. I'm going to quote my frat brother, John Lewis, when he says that voting is our most sacred, nonviolent tool that we have in our arsenal. And just being mindful of that, it's also heartbreaking to also come to a realization and the understanding that the current electoral system has long been broken. And while some of us say voting for the lesser of two evils is a necessary act in this election, and I actually heard it in multiple elections before of greater importance, there is the need to rethink and reshape the societal structures that actually force us to make such an offensive decision in the first place.
Awesome. And shout out to Congressman John Lewis. This t-shirt is in honor of him because I feel like this election highlights what he went through, what was part of his career to fight for our right to vote. And as we see the issue of suppression across the country, I think it's even more so necessary that we're informed about the election process, how we vote, what we're voting for, what is connected to what. So I'll get into that. Down ballot voting is something that's being stressed. It's stressed every election, but it's really being stressed this election. When we look at issues like Breonna Taylor's lack of indictment in her case, we know that that's the Attorney General for the state of Kentucky. We know that we deal with district attorneys in the local levels. We deal with your police departments, etc. How important is it, or can you kind of explain what down ballot voting is and the importance it is to us going into the polls this year? And we'll start with Farrakhan.
Yeah, so down ballot voting from what I was taught as a little kid is where, and you all correcting me if I'm wrong, and I'm pretty sure different states and different cities and regions of the country have different meanings to this, but down ballot voting is meaning that you're going straight down the ballot from top to bottom, and you're either voting for everybody blue, everybody red, or you're voting for everybody that's number one on the ballot, or you're voting for everybody that's number two on the ballot, or you're going down the list and you're just you're just randomly selecting things. And to me, I've actually walked into multiple polling places and literally seen that happen to the point to where after we walked out together, I had to pull them to the side and say, "Hey, man, what did you just do? Did you just waste your vote or waste everybody's time here by you just going in and just randomly selecting things down the ballot?" That's very important. I think that we need to be more educated and more consciously aware before we go to the polls of exactly who and what we're actually voting for and who actually represents the best interest of the individual that's going to vote and also the collective who is going to vote as well. So that's my take.
Okay, Shekinah.
So as Farrakhan just said, down ballot voting is people who are, it's not just the president. We're voting for our senators, our representatives on the federal level. Then you're also voting for state legislators as well. And then you're voting for district attorneys and or state attorneys. So district attorneys and state attorneys are the same thing. People get confused about that. They basically are the top prosecutors in a particular jurisdiction, right? And so when you come to the situation with Breonna Taylor, I remember when earlier on the legislators passed a bill concerning no-knock warrants. Everyone was like, well, how in the world can you pass a bill and not arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor? Well, the legislators did their job. They responded to the moment. It was then on the prosecutors to do their job, which we see what happened. And so right. That's something that you're voting for on your ballot as well. And so as Farrakhan said, you have to research who's on the ballot, what they stand for, and you have to press them with the questions. Candidates are not going to give you their entire plan, but they should be able to answer basic questions about how just because they're going to say, well, we're going to address this. Well, how are you going to address certain things? How are you going to address execution of no-knock warrants? How are you going to address police brutality? How exactly, what is your plan, and how are you going to engage the community, and how are you going to include the community in these decisions concerning our safety? Another thing is, and as I mentioned on a previous panel, is that now we see what tough on crime looks like. We see what the war on drugs looks like. We see what law and order looks like. What are you going to do concerning our safety? I'm just speaking in the criminal justice standpoint, right? And that's not only for your district attorneys or state attorneys, that's also for your legislators as well, because we have laws on the books. How is the prosecutor enforcing those laws? And how are the legislators paying attention to how the laws affect the community? And are you making certain amendments? And what are those proposed amendments? And so that's when we talk about down ballot voting, it also includes your judges, which is very key, because some judges are appointed and some are elected, right? Here in PG County, we had in the primary, one judge was kicked out, and a lot of us are pretty happy about that. And he's somebody that should have been kicked out earlier on. And so those are the things you want to pay attention to, because that affects your day-to-day living. Because at the federal level, yes, they can pass federal laws, but your state and municipal and local officials are the ones that determine whether or not they enforce them and how they enforce them. Federal funding, how federal funding is allocated. Your state and local officials determine those things.
All right. Go ahead, Farrakhan.
Yeah, I was just going to add that's very important what my sister just said, because the federal government can pass a federal legislation and say, hey, we're going to give $30 billion to provide affordable housing for everybody in the state of Missouri. But then the state is going to have a law that say that it can only be dispersed this way and that way. So I guess that's a point to add on to what my sister just said about how impactful local elections and local officials are, because they do affect your day-to-day living.
And so what I was going to transition into is, I feel like Shekinah kind of led into this, is talking about the issue of policing. So we know that there's several issues that are really important to the Black community this election. This is probably at the top of the list, racial justice and policing. Connect voting to the issue of who is policing us or how they're policing us, so people can understand the connection between their voice at the polls and how that translates into how policing is done in their local areas. And either one of you guys can start.
Ladies first.
So typically in cities you have, or in counties, you have the sheriff's office and then you have the police department, right? Sheriffs are typically elected. Police chiefs, though, are appointed, usually by your mayor or the county executive or so forth and so on. And so when it comes to voting, you have a direct impact on who the sheriff is going to be, because sheriffs also engage in police brutality at times. When it comes to police chief, you want whoever the mayor is or whoever the county executive is, that's who's making your decision for your police chief. So you kind of want to press them during the election about who they're going to appoint, how they're going to make that determination, and then how are they going to liaise with the police department and the sheriff's department regarding a certain task force concerning reducing the incidence of police violence and brutality, how they're going to change the landscape regarding our community safety. Who's on that particular task force matters, because if there's no community buy-in, no community engagement, that matters. If they're working autonomously or if they're working independently instead of working together, that also matters, because when you fail to include the current law enforcement department, a lot can go wrong, right? So where you're enacting these policies and these enacting legislation where it's going to directly impact their job and how they do their job, and they may not like how it's done because you never really included them. So even as painful as it is for some people, if you don't like officers, you're going to have to work with them until this current structure does change, to whereas it's more, there are more social workers involved. There are more or just other entities to address mental health issues and other safety issues. You're going to have to liaise with your police department, and how they liaise matters to the individual voter as well as civic groups.
Yeah.
All right.
On November 22nd, back in 2014, when Officer what's his name, Timothy Lehman, when he shot Tamir Rice in that park, the day before, I mean literally November 21st, the day before, there was an officer that made a complaint against the same police officer and made the recommendation that this officer needs to be fired. But instead, the chief ignored that and allowed him to stay on the force, even knowing the kind of the background, the complaints, the issues that he'd been having with community members. The chief still let him stay on. The next day, Tamir Rice was shot dead. Now let's bring it back down here to St. Louis. Right now, we have the police union who is currently in negotiations with our St. Louis mayor, president, board of aldermen, and our comptroller, trying to negotiate the police contract. And inside that police contract, it states whether or not if a police officer can transfer from department to department, knowing that they have racism, racist intent, knowing that they have violated police rules, they have violated civilian rules, they have violated and broken all kind of laws and rules. But still on the books, there is a law that says that these same bad officers can leave one department and go work for another department. So when we talk about how that's related to voting, then it brings up the point, well, how did that police chief ignore the fact that this Timothy Lehman was a violent cop? Or how did the Ferguson Police Department ignore the fact that Darren Wilson, who was removed from another police department in the St. Louis suburb, and then came to Ferguson and then had the same altercation that he had before that he had with Mike Brown? So all of that is related, because when these police unions are entering into negotiations, collective bargaining negotiations with the city representatives who are elected every 4 years and every 6 years, they're not having the mindset that the people on the streets are having, or they're not having the kind of intellectual thought process to know that, hey, we cannot have bad officers on our force because it is preventing the betterment of ties between law enforcement and the African-American community. And the only way that I realize that we can only really galvanize and really consume and really take over these negotiations that these police officers are having with these politicians is, number one, to make sure that we're in the room, and number two, to make sure that we are electing officials who can negotiate and not being afraid to negotiate because they're worried about getting an endorsement for the next election. So police brutality, not voting, lack of voting, or voting for the wrong person, it helps us get people like Darren Wilson. It helps us get people like Timothy Lehman, and it helps us get other officers on the force, not just police officers, but just people in general. It gives people the idea that, hey, what we did was wrong is okay because nobody said we violated the law, even though it was wrong.
Can also add something, Malika, is that most of our politicians have to adopt this tough on crime position because they want the support of the police departments, right? They want the support
the union.
The union, exactly.
The unions.
Uh-huh.
And so if we expect different from our elected officials, that may change some things too as a community, right? Expecting them to be smarter on safety as opposed to tough on crime, and really pressing them on that, right? And as a community, galvanizing and remaining cohesive throughout the entire election process, continuing to advocate and press for them to reduce. When it comes to when people say defund the police, I think people have gotten confused about that. It's right. Reallocating resources that are typically every year they improve or they increase budgets for police departments for training, or for tactical gear, for all of these different things, right? And we still get the same result every year. And so what we're pressing for is for you to re-examine the budget, re-examine how you allocate our resources with the taxes we pay, how you allocate those resources, and then reallocate them for things like education, because it's going to reduce crime. Things like job employment, job security, financial security, those things. The data shows that when people are more financially secure, when they have better access to education, it reduces crime because the instance of poverty is reduced. So those are things to consider as well.
Yeah, so mass arresting does not eliminate crime and poverty.
Or that
over policing does not eliminate crime and all of this other stuff. It's reinvestment and services.
Right, and I do agree, because defund is probably the wrong word. I think that people hear that and they're thinking we're saying take the money away from policing, which means we won't have as many resources. No, it needs to be reallocated to the appropriate places, because you have the police departments replying to or responding to all types of calls. They're responding to mental health calls. They're responding to domestic violence calls. They're responding to what we would consider actual crimes, break-ins, robberies, vandalisms, things that we know that fall under what we would consider the typical things as crime. But I mean, I live in Southern California. I don't live in Los Angeles, but I do live in Los Angeles County. LAPD's budget for the police department for this year is almost $2 billion with a B, $2 billion. Fortunately, the mayor has asked them to reallocate funds to specific areas. Like she kind of talked about mental health, talked about education, making sure that the schools have more funding, making sure that things like after school programs, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, those things are being funded so that if we get the kids and things when they're young, we don't have to over police them when they become older. And I feel like we're putting so much into victimizing through the police department, because that's the way I look at it. We're being looked at as criminals, and so we're being victimized, but they're using the police to do that. What if we reallocate and give kids a chance in the beginning? Then you don't have to come out. And I'm real sensitive about the mental health thing, because that's my area, my field of profession. And we see too many times where people are being shot or killed because they're having a crisis and they're not being understood at the fact that this is a mental health issue and not a crime issue. And so I do think that defunding is something that people should probably research and really understand what that means before they just write it off and say, oh no, it's we can't do that. We have to have police.
Yeah, I'm glad you just said that last sentence that you just said. There's a myth out there that mainstream media believe that Black people do not want the police, or Black people do not believe in policing. Every Black person wants to be safe. Every Black person wants to be secure. Every Black person wants to be protected. So it's not that we are anti-police or we don't want police in our communities at all. We just want good and righteous and professional police that are a true representation of us. The only reason why people are hearing or seeing or shouting defund the police, because the current police structure, it is not in our favor. So the only way that we can get around it is to take away their funding and give it elsewhere. But we believe in policing. You know, I want my siblings to be protected. I want my grandmother to be protected walking down the street. If somebody is shooting children, if somebody is beating on women, yeah, I want them to be arrested, and yeah, I want them to be in jail. So yes, we believe in the police. We just also want the right police.
Right.
Right. We want people that see us as human
Yeah,
beings, that you're there to protect and serve us as well,
that's
not
it.
just people that have less melanin than us. We want everyone to be protected.
That's it.
Go ahead, Shekinah. I think you were about to say something.
I was going to say, historically, that is true, that actually African Americans, especially in the urban inner cities, they actually want to rely on the police. The problem is,
Yeah,
come around,
yeah,
it's not good. It's not always a good experience, right? And so, also historically speaking, African Americans have been pressing for these tough on crime policies as well. So we also have to really rethink how we've approached policing and law enforcement as individuals. And and not saying that you shouldn't call the police or not dial 911 when you feel in jeopardy, but I have seen where people have called 911 for some really ridiculous reasons on one another. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it comes down to, I know we're kind of getting off topic of voting, but it really comes down to what the community expects out of not only the elected officials, but also the people who are hired as a result of these elected officials, right? Who are the line people, the line prosecutors, the police who are on the street, because typically the teachers, police, prosecutors, many public servants are not treated fairly to begin with. They're overworked because all of society's ills fall on law enforcement, as we just said, right? If we begin to really also not only reallocate funds, reallocate expectations, right, of our education system, of our health system, we begin to see different police officers as well, because their mental health is also in jeopardy at times, given what they do for a living. And so it's just sometimes it's just really bad combination of, and there could be underlying racist tendencies and beliefs as well, but more often than not, their mental health is really in jeopardy almost every day. And so when they mix into community who also has mental health issues, it becomes a problem. So how are the elected officials going to address mental health concerns for the entire community, including public servants?
Yeah, I agree with you on the mental health of the officers. My belief system with how we do mental health checks on them is probably much different than most people, and probably will be more expensive, but we should not only be doing psych checks on them before they get hired or if they have a shooting or a discharge of their weapon on duty. I feel like every year, maybe every 6 months, they should be doing a mental health screening, because the job itself changes a person. They may not go into the job being biased or being racist, but the experiences that they've had while on the job might actually change who they are as a person. So we need to be constantly tapped into them and their mental health to know where they're at. Hopefully that'll give us the red flags. We'll be able to see it before something serious happens. We don't want to keep having, you know, Breonna Taylor's and Tamir Rice's and Jacob Blake, and we could just run the list. And the problem is that there's a list. We don't have to keep having those if we're really making sure that we're looking at the mental health of the officers as a priority. If they're not okay, then they can't do their job effectively. And I think it's another part of it too, is that they need to also be able to connect to us as human beings. Most people police in areas with people that they don't live around, probably didn't grow up around, or not used to seeing them. I have my best friend's son grew up in Georgia, and he was like, most of the people in the city he lived in was predominantly white, worked in Atlanta, which is predominantly Black, but did not grow up in that area. So they left a place with people that looked like them to go police a group of people that didn't look like them. And that's a recipe for disaster, because you don't understand that dynamic. We have to have a lot of things that need to be done to make policing better. And I know that this kind of is off the topic of voting, but it kind of isn't, because defunding has been a topic of this election. It has been thrown out there, which candidates are for defunding the police and what does that mean. So I do feel like you do need to understand what they're saying when you vote, because part of it is being educated when you make the choice of who you want for your elected official. So we do have a question, whether or not there's continuing education requirements for police departments. That's a good question. Do any of you guys know? I'm guessing. I can guess for certain areas.
So for my experience, it's been more voluntary. There are certain training requirements they have to maintain certain certifications to stay on the job. But when it comes to things that we're talking about, like systemic racism and how to engage with the community and things of that nature, I don't know that there's continuing education for police officers for that particular instance. I think it's more so like their tactical training and things of that nature. From what I understand, but check me on that.
Yeah, I do believe that it's more, they do have to do firearms recertification, depending on how often they have to do it. There's certain things they have to do, like you said, that are tactical, but not related to the things that we're talking about. That's not considered a priority in relationship to the job that they do, which I feel is an oversight. So again, these are things that we can put out there to these candidates. Like she kind of said, we have to hold them to task. Yes, we elect you, but I feel like part of the problem is we never push our issues. So we'll get mad because the LGBTQ community has pushed their issues and made sure that those candidates delivered on the votes that they gave them, but we feel neglected. Well, what do we do to force their hand? Did we get in their face consistently? Did we let them know that we need these things taken care of? That's the voting extends beyond the vote. It goes into, once they're in the office, holding them to task of the promises that they made. And that is something that I feel like as a community, we've been very bad at doing in recent times. We're not really good with follow through, and we need to follow through on the votes that we gave, because it is conditional. If you're not doing the job, then we'll put someone else in that can do it more effectively. Let's get into the issue of COVID-19. This one right here, I feel like goes all over the map, especially if you're a religious person or a spiritual believer. It goes every which way. From the church is being persecuted because we can't have, services in person, depending on what state you're in. And I'm not going to get into all of that because I just think it's nonsense, but that's just me. But I feel like COVID-19 has exposed things that we already know. We know that there are health disparities when it comes to the African-American community compared to other communities. And COVID has just highlighted what we already knew and magnified it and made it worse. How does our vote connect to the health resources or the healthcare system, what's available to us as a community? Because I don't know if people really understand that voting does also connect to our representation or our services that we receive as a community when it comes to our healthcare, and even the responses to COVID-19 that will possibly play a part in that. So Farrakhan, I'm gonna let you start off with this one.
Sure. So voting, obviously, if you go and vote and you have a local person, a state person, or a federal person that's running for office, and they are huge proponents of affordable and quality healthcare, you can almost bet that's going to be one person that's going to go into a general assembly or go to DC and hopefully advocate for more funding for healthcare centers, specifically around those who are in that disparity gap. So that comes another point when it comes to who to vote for, why to vote for them, to listen to see if they're speaking your language. Right? If they're not talking about healthcare and you're staying in the city that is 90% don't have a healthcare, or there's not a healthcare center or a hospital miles apart from each other, but you got people that's constantly getting sick, people that's constantly dying, people that's constantly having complications, then we really, really, really need to make sure that we are electing and voting for people that can get in position and allocate money for health to close health disparities. just here in St. Louis alone, we know that we got some federal CARES Act money came down, and one of the healthcare centers that we have, shout out to Athenia Healthcare and Dr. Kendra Holmes, who is the COO of Athenia Healthcare, strong, powerful sister. And because of that CARES money came down, and because of Athenia Healthcare is centered in Black communities where there are huge health disparities, that money was actually given to her to expand COVID-19 testing in every single Black community in St. Louis. And she have been doing that. As a COO of a multi-billion-dollar healthcare company, she is out there testing, driving, greeting, shaking hands, and all of this is being done for free. So it is very important that we elect people that is going to make sure that our healthcare centers are fully funded, not partial, not quarterly, fully funded, because our healthcare centers are on the front lines of this pandemic. And I definitely want to give a shout out to our healthcare workers, man, all of our first responders who are out there on front lines, our daycare workers, even our school teachers who are starting to get kids to come back to school, them nurses and everything. Shout out to them. Sorry to go off script.
No, you're good. Go ahead, Shekinah.
So for me, I totally agree with Farrakhan on choosing people who are going to continue to advocate on our behalf on a community level, on a local level, because that definitely matters. At the end of the day, even when funds are released, if the person is not there pestering the top people, that money's not coming to your community, your local jurisdiction. So I totally agree with him on that. For me, I think this election is so paramount because the Affordable Care Act is in jeopardy. Yep. And I want to know from my elected officials, what is their plan in the event that it is invalidated in the Supreme Court? How do they plan to still take care of us on the local level? We know that there are some states like California is probably going to be good, right? Some liberal states are going to do what they have to do. I'm worried about my brothers and sisters down in the South and in the Midwest when it comes to healthcare.
I think also another good point to add on how we're relating testing, the pandemic to voting. Missouri just passed a ballot issue to expand Medicaid, right? So there are ballot initiatives that are on ballots across the state to expand healthcare. And the only way that these ballot initiatives were able to get on the ballot is because thousands of people across the state signed petitions demanding, hey, I want healthcare. I want to go to the doctor. And if I got this issue, it ought to be taken care of, or there needs to be a deduction or a discount or something. So it's really not only in the hands of politicians to secure funding for our healthcare centers and our hospitals and so forth, but it's also up to us to demand better healthcare and actually get that on the ballot and force that into the law books. They say power concedes nothing without a demand, and it definitely won't concede if that demand is coming from a weak constituency.
We can't be nice. Don't understand the grassroots effort. You cannot be nice. I know saints. we love to, we say pray, don't worry. It's not really. It's more being concerned citizen, right? And being diligent. Right. And you don't have to curse anyone out. You don't have to. You don't have to yell. You don't have to scream. But you have to ensure that your voice is heard, because advocacy is part of it, and it has to be consistent and diligent. And you also have to join in with other people. We're stronger together, and there's power in numbers.
I think you brought up a point, and I don't know if I put this as an actual question, but this is something that is concerning to me. It was concerning to me in 2016 because of the possibility whoever was elected could possibly appoint up to 4 Supreme Court justices, depending on how things shook out, whether people retired or passed away or whatever happened. And that doesn't even include the federal judges. which we know those are also lifetime appointments. How do people understand the severity of who they elect connected to the Supreme Court? So right now we know that there are only 8 justices because of Justice Ginsburg actually passing away. So she was the 9th justice. And so there is the question of connecting that, who you elect as the president, to who's appointed. And also let's connect this to your attorney general as well, because I feel like this is my thing with the Breonna Taylor case. If we don't get justice for her at the state level, there is still the possibility of getting federal justice for her because her civil rights were violated. In my opinion, again, I'm not the attorney. I figure Shekinah would probably be better versed on that. But that all is connected to who you elect as president, because they appoint these people to those positions. So allow people to understand it's more than just you're electing a president. You're electing all the other people that come in line, and the importance of the Supreme Court, especially with this election, because it's more than just the ACA that is in question right now. The election itself, the results itself, could be possibly sent to the Supreme Court to be voted on.
I think right now what we're facing is, I think, the Trump fan club, right? Or the Republican fan club, and even some Democrats fan clubs. There's some Democrats that say they Democrats, but they really aren't. You all know that. But the way that it is being handled ever since his first term, and I want everyone to be mindful that these appointments are lifetime appointments, right? So now the complete judicial system have now been shaped for the next 50 years. So whatever decision is being made right now, we're going to be forced to live with it for the next 50 to 100 years. That means a strong reduction in healthcare services. That means an over-militarized police. That means the complete wiping away or diluting of your basic civil rights. That means the everyday services that we will be getting through the help of government services are now being wiped away, which means now for the next 50 to 100 years, you are all on your own, because every time when we try to contest this, or every time when we try to debate this, it's going to fall on deaf ears, because the same people that we're pleading to repeal this are the same people that voted to allow it to happen to begin with. So even though our justice system, our judicial system is being shaped by these, if you notice, all the Trump appointments, even from the circuit judges, even from the appellate judges, even in the repeal of circuit court, I forgot what it's called. They're all young. Mm-hmm. These are all young white women and white men, young, at least 50 and younger,
40s
and younger. Right. Mm-hmm. So they're shaping us, and they're putting things in this country. They're playing chess, not checkers.
Yep.
And we have to be just as combative as that. So if we realize that Trump is appointing all of these young, conservative and racist and anti-black and anti-movement figures, then we have to understand that, hey, what's the check and balance? Well, how can we prevent these people from getting confirmed? Well, we need to look at our partners, our 50 friends, our 100 friends in the Senate, right? Yep. Because all of these senators are confirming these young people that's shaping the judicial system for the next couple of years. We need to make sure that hey, man, like this is our goal. This is our objective, man. We want progressives. I don't understand all of the political terms: progressive, liberal, far right, far left, far middle, center, back, left, up, down. Right. The matter is that it's either you helping people, serving people, or you prevent people from growing and prospering. And anything short of that, you're in the wrong. So we got to combat it at every single level.
And so before we get to Shekinah, I'm gonna remind everyone, please share this. Just share this conversation with everyone that is connected to you, because I think this is important to get this message out to as many people as possible. And I wanted to hit this question. I was gonna get into this, but the question comes out about how concerned should we be about voter suppression? So the long lines, the closing of polls, the issues that we saw specifically in Georgia. I feel like what happened in Georgia during their primary was highlighted on a national level, and it just continued to trickle down because states after that had similar issues. How concerned should we be about that? And then I'll give you the second part of this question because I feel like it goes into something else. So let's just start with the voter suppression issue. How concerned should it be we be, and what tips can you give to people that can help with this?
We should be very concerned because voter suppression is not a new issue. This, especially the way it's been played out currently, as soon as President Obama was elected, Republicans were working. Like 2016 didn't just happen, right?
No.
There was not only legislation but litigation in federal courts concerning voting rights. I remember there was a case in 2013 in Texas, whereas regarding voter suppression, I remember thinking then, I probably should pay attention to this because something's going to happen out of this. And lo and behold, in certain typically conservative states, we've seen different levels of voter suppression, and it can be something as allowing long lines or closing certain polling stations early. And we even saw there was video where people were banging on the windows, like, let us in. People were not playing, right? And so you really have to have that kind of intentional wherewithal to be like, you know what, I'm safe, but you're gonna let me in this polling station.
Right.
So by any means necessary, right? And so
yeah.
And so also when it comes to just being the purging of the the registered voters is really something that concerns me. We see that happening a lot in the southern states as well. And so as a voter, you have to, here's number one, when it comes to voter registration, when you move, update your registration, right? Or just if you haven't registered, get registered. You can Google how to register in your particular state, right? And then also always be checking it periodically, your registration, because especially if you know you live in a jurisdiction where they purge the registered voters, you need to be checking that periodically as well. And then when it comes to social media, let me tell you, it's a tool that blesses and then it takes away at times. But when it comes to voter suppression and police brutality, your cell phone is sometimes your best weapon, right? And filming what's going on, because that's when you get the attention of people who otherwise would not care. It's when it's on film, right? And so those are certain things you have to be willing to go the extra mile when you know that you're going to combat voter suppression in your particular area.
I think the social media piece is important. The reason why I knew about what was happening in Atlanta is because the videos were going viral on Twitter and Instagram of people standing in line, and it was multiple people. They didn't all just look like us. Some of them were people that were white that lived in a predominantly Black polling area and was being affected by it. So social media is a weapon. They don't like to be embarrassed because those videos ended up making it to the news in the middle of the day. So not the nighttime, run at 6 and 7, but it made the afternoon news because so many videos were circulating about this issue. It was highlighted. I believe Kentucky was a state after that had similar issues with voting suppression. But Farrakhan, I want you to talk about this because for me, this is probably one of the biggest worries that we need to have, that they won't allow us to vote. So it's beyond just them not being counted, us not being allowed to vote. Yeah. So go ahead and give your opinion on this particular issue.
So I'm gonna take it back to 1964 with the voting rights. 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. So the whole reason of why Dr. King, John Lewis, Adam Clayton Powell, gosh, what's the guy name from the Urban League? Dang, I can't even think of his name. But anyway, the whole reason of why they was promoting or wanted the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to pass in the first place was because they knew that down in the South, there were specific Southern state governments that were literally disenfranchising, or what they call it, purging all of these voters and creating barriers to prevent Black people from coming out to vote. As you all recall, back in June, I believe, of 2012 or 2013, the Supreme Court struck down the strongest component of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by 5-4 vote, giving all 9 states in the South, which is also known as the Confederate, the right to change their election laws without advance federal approval.
Yep.
If that had not been struck down, we would not have the voting being purged in Florida. We wouldn't have the vote purges in Georgia, where we would have Stacey Abrams as governor. We wouldn't have the voting right purges in Louisiana, Texas. And if you all pay attention to these election cycles, it always comes down to a Southern state to decide the presidency. Always. Florida in 2000, Florida again in 2004, Louisiana in 2008, Texas. It's like a repetition. So the court was divided just along ideological lines. But I just wanted to put that out there to say that the Supreme Court, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The teeth that was stripped away from it, it's actually giving room for all of these attorney generals, all of these Jeff Sessions, all of these William Barrs to come down and say, hey, we don't have to let these Negroes vote. Or, hey, we don't have to let these ex-felons vote, even though they paid their debt to society. Or we don't have to let these people vote just because they fear they may get sick from COVID-19. Man, what? Those were the strongest pillars of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that the federal government protected people to vote for whatever reason it may be. But now we see the states coming in and reversing those decisions. So it's a shame, and we got to make sure that we pay attention to not just on the federal level, but also on the state levels as well, because wherever the federal government lacks, it's because the state is actually stepping in and doing it instead of the federal government. And it always don't turn out in our favor.
And Malika, can I also add something? Go back to that original point, the point about the Supreme Court, right? And why those lifetime appointments matter. He just brought up one salient point, is that how they interpret the law matters, right? The who's coming in, who we believe is all but certain is going to replace RBG. She was a mentee of Scalia, right?
Right.
His interpretation usually was in favor of conservative values, right? And so how she's going to interpret the law, as Brother Farrakhan said, is going to impact us for generations to come. That's what you're voting for when you vote. You not just the president, but then also the Senate, who's going to confirm. Because if you have a Republican president and a Republican majority Senate, that's it. If you have a Democratic president and a majority Democratic Senate, that's it, right? Yeah. When it comes to lifetime appointments on that bench and how they interpret it, because they can pass federal laws all day, but how the Supreme Court interprets it matters.
And it's not always interpreted by law. And I think that that's key. It's usually interpreted politically, which is the reason why, and then I'm gonna let you get on this, Farrakhan. The reason why the several decisions, I think there's 2 decisions that came through the Supreme Court recently. And we know that Justice Roberts is a Chief Justice, and we know that he's a conservative, but he was also the deciding vote because everything was split pretty much based on the party, the political affiliation, whether you're conservative or whether you were liberal. And he voted according to the law, which actually handed defeat to the current administration on things that they thought was just going to be rubber stamped and pushed through. And they were upset about that. So we need to appoint people, regardless of their political affiliation, that are going to interpret it by the law. And I think that that's really important, that we don't get caught up in the party, but we get caught up in how are they as a jurist? What was their record as a jurist? Do we even look into that? How they voted, what issues were important to them? How did they fight? We get caught up in, are they Republican or are they Democrat? That doesn't matter. We know that Roberts is a Republican, but the way he voted on these two particular cases were actually more so on the side of the liberals, because he said the law was on their side, the interpretation of the case they presented. So I do think that that's a point that people have to look at. Go beyond the party. You need to look at what their record actually is, because you may find that someone who's registered as a Republican may have views that line up with what you're trying to accomplish or what you consider important to your community. Go ahead, Farrakhan. I'm gonna let you tag in on that.
Yeah, so since we still on the topic of the Supreme Court and voting and the impacts of all of that, also keep in mind that not only the best way that I've learned from Republicans, the best way to steal an election is to gerrymander it, to manipulate the boundary so that it can favor them. Currently,
okay,
right now,
stop for a second, because gentrification was on my list and the gerrymandering was on my list. This was a question that we had, and I didn't know if we would get to it. But since you opened the door, let's go ahead and go into that.
Okay. So, what was the? Did you want to ask the question?
No, go ahead. You're already in there. I just want people to understand that this was probably something I didn't think we would get to it, but go ahead.
Gotcha.
This is good.
So there's a case right now that the Supreme Court hasn't decided on to hear it yet. And that case is illegal gerrymandering across all 50 states. So when they say, hey, my vote don't count or my vote don't matter, right? If you are forced to be gerrymandered, if you are forced to be in a political subdivision to where your automatic vote, every time you go to a poll and you vote, that vote is going to automatically go towards something that you don't even want to happen because you were in a gerrymandered district. This case is right now is waiting for the Supreme Court to hear it and to hear both sides of it. And do we all believe that if Trump gets this appointment, that we're going to have a gerrymandering law or decision in disenfranchised people's favor? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. So now our vote is going to be continued to be weakened. And we won't be able to change that until every 10 years, every 20 years, every 30 years, every 40 years. But with the way that the judicial system is being stacked with these young judges, that may be, what's 100 years? Is that a millennium?
Century.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be another century. So gerrymandering,
we won't be
rigging, Supreme Court, all in the same topic.
And should the Lord tarry, saints, we always say that.
Listen,
should the Lord
you know
tarry?
how old I'll be? I won't be here, is what I'm saying, personally.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm looking for that blessed return, but should he tarry, it's gonna affect us, our children, our grandchildren.
It's our kids. Yeah, it's our children.
It's the generations after us that I don't think we take into account. I'm a mother. I have daughters who are now voting age. So for me, it's beyond just what I can see in my lifetime. I have to be concerned about what's going to affect them and the kids that they will have and the kids that their kids will have, because I don't know how long it's going to be before the Lord comes back. I'm not going to try to be a prophet like most people saying we in the last days. They've been saying that my entire life. I am 47. My entire life, they have been saying it's the last days. I'm like, come on, y'all. Let's just say we know he's coming soon and just leave it at that. But we have to plan for people other than ourselves. And I think that voting has become a very selfish thing and not the community thing that it used to be, because it used to be about the collective, what's good for all. And I feel like we've gotten away from that. And I feel like this election has highlighted that and even higher numbers. This past election, 2016, has highlighted how much we have become selfish with what we're voting for. Let me get another question that came up because I feel like this one was important. The question of whether or not Trump will accept the election results. How afraid should we be about him accepting the election results? Is that a worry? Should we still vote if that's a possibility?
Oh, we should still vote, like still be heard. Malika, did you go off or are you still here? Okay. So we still be heard, still make your voice heard, still engage in your civic duty, yes. But should we be concerned about a constitutional crisis? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we should.
I mean,
and that's
okay. So then the question comes up. It's like, well, if we know that this is a possibility that our votes are going to be disputed, how is our voice really being heard? Because they're not accepting what we're saying.
I think at that point, it goes back to power concedes nothing without a demand. I think we'll have to, at that point, take it to the streets.
Well, no justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace.
And strength in numbers. I mean, you know what it is. Like when it comes to people of color, particularly Black folks, we're not new to this. We're true to this. Okay, we know what it is when it comes to making ourselves heard and going the extra round, going above and beyond. Again, vote. Put feet to the pavement and continue to do so. Put pen to paper. Do what you have to do and do it as a collective. Do it as a community. I can't really stress that enough. At the risk of redundancy, we have to ensure that, like you said, we're not being selfish with our vote. We're not being selfish with our civic duty. We're not being selfish with our responsibility as citizens of this nation, the nation in which our ancestors built from the ground up, their blood, their sweat, their tears in the soil. We do have a duty to ensure that our voices are heard by any means necessary within the bounds of salvation. Praise the Lord.
Now, my sister, Shakina. Now, because you said that, you may also get some folks that may say, well, because our ancestors did that, because our ancestors died, put blood, sweat, was hung and sacrificed and did all of that. Some people will come to you and say, well, because they did that, and this democracy is still a sham. I'm definitely not go out there and vote now, right? Because my ancestors, they did all of this, and America still ain't giving us the justice or giving us the benefit of the doubt or giving us that, not necessarily given, but we haven't taken it yet, right?
Right.
And so we'll have so many people come up to me and say, hey man, look, my mama been voting for 40 years and she's still poor, right? Or my sister that had breast cancer and she went to the doctor, she keep getting denied, but she's a faithful voter, right? So how, I guess my question would be to y'all, I'm kind of like, I'm an audience member now. My question would be to y'all, what would you articulate to that person? What would you say to that person?
Well, first and foremost, for me, we've only been free on paper for how long? So it took,
let's be real,
to get us in this position. It's going to take probably centuries to really flip the script. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's going to take work upon work upon work. And like my sisters in the comments, Laura Johnson, praise the Lord, she said voting is beyond the booth. It's beyond the election. Being a voter, you have to be an active participant, right? So when it comes to issues of poverty, what are you doing as an individual to address that issue? But also, what are you doing in the community when it comes to pressing your elected officials and your public servants concerning poverty in your community, right? When it comes to healthcare, same thing. We have to be consistent in our endeavors to hold our public officials accountable. It doesn't stop at the booth.
But also, let's be honest. Because I'm gonna probably make some people mad with this. We only get hyped up for voting when there's a presidential election. How many of us don't vote in midterms? The midterms in 2018 were critical for flipping the dynamic of the House of Representatives. Had we not gone out in the numbers that we did during 2018, they would still have a majority in the Senate and the House. They had a supermajority. So they had the White House and they had both houses of Congress under Republican control, which means there's really no checks and balances. It's just basically, we're going to just let him
Rubber
do
stamp.
whatever. Right. It's a rubber stamp because they're going to vote along party lines. That's unfortunately, it's very partisan in Congress. I think that we have to understand that we need to be informed about the terms. When are certain senators and Congress people up for reelection? We need to know that. We need to be informed about when state officials are up for reelection. Like I looked into when Daniel Cameron, when he's up for reelection, and whether or not there's recall rights in the state of Kentucky. They don't have recall rights in Kentucky.
California is all about that life. Listen.
Look, we recalled a whole governor in California. So, like, if we don't like you, we will get you out.
Right.
We don't care if you were elected, but Kentucky doesn't have that. But we also know that he was put in place, the AG was put in place in Kentucky right before the election. So he was elected last year. So 2019 is when he was elected. They do it before the general election occurs. I think that's their state policy. So he got his job just in time for 2020. So it wasn't an accident that he was elected and he had the support that he had. So I do feel like we can't complain when we only vote for the stuff that's glitzy and glamorous. We know the presidential election gets all the glitz and glam, but the city council or your school board doesn't get the same notoriety, but those are also important. The school board makes the decisions on whether or not your kids have to go back to school right now during the pandemic, because those are the people making the decisions for that local group of schools. So I do feel like it's really important for us to not be jaded in our opinions when we haven't even really been completely engaged the way we needed to. The other thing that I think is really important is the vote by ballot. So let's get into the absentee issue. I'm a permanent absentee voter because my schedule is so all over the place that a lot of times I don't have the ability, and it's been that way for a while, to stand in line like I used to. So I registered as permanent absentee, and actually everyone in my house, my husband and my daughters are also registered that way because you can vote early, right? So you get your ballot early, you can vote early and get it out the way. Should we be worried about this? Is vote by mail safe? Is it higher risk of fraud if we vote that way? If we do, what are some concerns that we should take into account if we're using a mail-in ballot?
Yeah, I would speak for Missouri. I would say as soon as you get it, fill it out and turn it in ASAP.
Mm-hmm.
Don't even wait. Don't even say, oh, I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do it later on. I'm going to do it next week. Put it in the mail right now, because with so much uncertainty with the delivery time, there's a possibility that your ballot may not even get to the election place in time.
Right.
Thus,
should they mail it?
Thus, your vote has just been purged and you didn't even know. But
should they mail it? That's the question. Because I know we're pushing to walk it into an actual election official.
See, if you are see, the purpose of mail-in is if you have a physical incapacity to walk or go into the poll. And if you obviously have that disability to where you can't walk into the poll, then the only best way that you can do is mail it in. Most states are not even off. They're not giving you the option to scan it or take a picture and email it. The only two options that they're giving you are to mail it in or to come on into the voting booth and vote. So if that is the case, then you need to get that ballot, mail it in as soon as possible. 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 Do not
Y'all
wait.
hearing right? As soon as possible.
Yeah, but I also know that there are some concerns with that as well. I would just, the post office would really be much out of our control, out of any person's control, Right. So soon as that is in the box, it's like you're done with it. You don't even know if it get there in time. You won't know if it's being rejected. You won't know anything. So I would advise everybody who's tuning in to pay attention to your local election authority board contact them, get their phone number, contact the election commissioner, election director, and make sure that you are in communication and you know about the deadlines of when to submit them, how to submit them, and even as far as making sure that it's 100% completed. A lot of applications, a lot of ballots are turned in, and I've been working at the election board for about 3 years, and I've seen ballots come in where they're incomplete. I've seen ballots come in where they're not all the way checked or all the way circled in, you know, and I've seen that. And those are votes that are not being counted. So
So I
contact your
will say
local
this.
election board.
I will say this. In California, you do have the ability to drop it in a designated box from the Board of Elections. And so there are locations where there are unstaffed locations and there are staffed locations where you can take in the physical ballot that is a mail-in ballot and drop it in. They also allow for a family member, in the case of an incapacitated person, if the ballot is properly signed and sealed and dated, to drop that off as long as that was done prior to them bringing it in. They can't sign for you, but you can sign it and give it to them as making sure that you did all of what you're supposed to do. The other thing about mail-in ballots is that you can track your ballots, because mail-in voting actually increased in 2016. And we know it's going to be huge for this year because of the pandemic. I will give this towards the end, but you do have the ability to track your ballot. I looked at mine just to see what my voting history was. It actually took me back to 2012 of how long they've been tracking my voting history. It told if it was a mail-in ballot, it told when I had to vote provisionally, because one election I didn't have the ballot with me. I waited till the last minute. It was election day. I walked into the local poll that was where I was at and voted provisionally. It actually said that. It said if it was a presidential election, if it was a midterm, it said if it was a primary, like it has all of your history in this thing. And all you need to do is sign up for it. You can get text messages, you can check a website that will give you your history to make sure your ballot was received and processed. So I feel like that's really important to know that your ballot was counted and where it's at. So it's not just out in the universe and no one knows where it is. So that's really important. So I will share that. Shekinah, let's talk about the issue of mail-in voting. You're in a different state, even though you grew up here in California. You're out in DC, Maryland area. So just talk about what we should be aware of when it comes to mail-in and absentee voting.
So for me, I have to be honest, I've never done a mail-in ballot. I've always walked into the poll. I will say, because Maryland is a liberal state, I'm speaking from a place of privilege. I've only lived in liberal states, whereas I've never had to worry about my vote being suppressed. So when it comes to Farrakhan pretty much said it all, especially coming from a state where he probably has experienced voter suppression more than I ever have in my entire life, of what to do. As soon as you get it, mail it in. If you haven't received it yet, hound somebody and get your ballot if you know you have to mail it in. Also, there are certain, check out if you can, on the day of, drive around and drop it in, right? There are different ways to get it done where you don't have to stand in the long lines. So again, go to your Board of Elections website, read it, research it. If you have questions, follow up, call, ask. Just really, it really comes down to how diligent you're going to be in this process when it comes to getting all your questions answered and ensuring that you're doing it correctly.
So let me give the website. It's called Ballot Tracks. So ballot is spelled out completely, TRAX.com. So BALLOTTRAX.com. Every state doesn't necessarily have it, but I do know they pilot tested it in Colorado in 2009. California uses it. And right now, I believe that there are up to 15 states that are using this ability for you to be able to track your ballot. You need to sign up now. So number one, you can check your voter registration on this website. You can also check your voting history. It should have your history on there. They should be able to go back, because all of that information should be computerized, to put that in there to be able to see that you have a voting history. It'll also let you know what party you're registered to. It'll ask probably information that you should know about you individually that will be beneficial. But I do feel like that's necessary, simply because we don't want to believe that our votes are just out into the universe and we don't have a way to figure out what happens. We do have the ability to try to keep track of that. It looks like we lost Farrakhan. And so we want to have remind you guys that we do want you to give to IPYPU to support the programming that they're putting on. Everything that they're doing right now, we know is virtual, but there's still expenses related to what they're giving out virtually. And I hope that this was done for you. It gave you something to think about. It provoked you to resources that you weren't aware of, and that it will help you really shape how you are voting in the November election, which is less than 40 days away. You can give by Cash App, and it is just simply the $ IPYPU. And so we know that it's important to support good quality programming, especially at a time like this, so we can continue to have these conversations. And we probably need to come back and have it again. I don't think that, you know, an hour and some change is enough for us to really dig into this, but we wanted to get this in now before we get too close to the election. And people are basically inundated with information and don't know how to sift through that prior to. And just know that the amount of information that's election related is only going to increase. It's going to get worse. The emails, the text messages, the mail, the stuff that you get in the mail is only going to go up. The closer we get to the election, you're going to be bombarded by information. And so we definitely want to thank you all for taking the time, for being out and listening. Please share this, get this conversation out there. Somehow we lost Farrakhan, and I wanted to be able to tell him thank you for being a part. Thank you, Shekinah, so much for adding your expertise to this particular area. When we talked about this conversation of panelists, you were the first person I thought about. Just simply because I love you so much. But you're very knowledgeable, and I know that you work hard in this particular area. So I wanted them to see a young face that is working more than just in the church, that you're doing things for your people, but in a civic arena. And I thought that that was important. And Farrakhan's connection to the community and the work that he does, not only through his fraternity, but also the work he is doing personally in other areas that connect to the Black community. I think that it was necessary for us to have this conversation. So we're not going to hang out too long. If you have any kind of questions that you guys want to put in the comments of this particular video, we will go back and try to answer them after the fact. So we may not be able to stay on to answer them live, but we will definitely be on there to be able to answer them after the fact. Don't forget, again, you can give via Cash App at the $ IPYPU. And then you can also send questions to the IPYPU as well. The email address is IPYPUinfo@gmail.com if you have more questions in regards to this particular issue, or if you would like to put comments on this particular post, this video, you can do that as well. And we will make sure that you get questions and resources available in your local areas. Again, I am Dr. Malika Brown. It was my pleasure to be a host for this conversation. Remember that there is power in the polls, and we want to encourage you to all get out and vote, hopefully before November 3rd, but make sure that you vote no later than on Election Day, which is November 3rd. Thank you guys, and have a great rest of your week.